I want to welcome Malcolm, who's just going. You probably won't be able to have a look around the exhibition properly today, but if you can come back another time when there's a bit more time, a bit more space, it would be lovely to come and have a look. I want to welcome Malcolm because he's put in an awful lot of time and research, putting faces to the names that are carved on a piece of stone. And there those names sit, and every year copies are put around the cenotaph and the memorial. And what Malcolm has done is brought them to life here in our exhibition. So he's just going to give you a few pointers and a few stories that were shared by people from Port Isaac, which have made all of this possible. So thank you.
Last year I spent a long time researching our casualties from the First World War, and for the last couple of months I seem to have done nothing but look at all of the stories, and they're wonderful stories, of the casualties in the Second World War. We've actually got 23 names on our war memorial from the Second World War, but I managed to find 5 others who clearly have links to Port Isaac, who for some reason or another are not on our memorial, and they are included at the back there because I think they need to be honoured as well. Not surprisingly, almost half of our casualties were in the Navy. Like Bert Keat, for example, he was a Royal Marine, and he was killed on HMS Dorsetshire in 1942 when the ship was dive-bombed by the Japanese. Ray Madoton, he was an air mechanic on the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious, and he was killed off Sicily when German dive bombers dropped a bomb into the aircraft lift, which was the one weak spot on the armoured deck of Illustrious. It went straight through and it blew up, and there were probably about 100 and so many killed, including Ray Madoton. And Raymond, actually his father, was also on the memorial in the First World War. He was a casualty, having been killed at Gallipoli, and he died a few months after Raymond was born, so they never ever met each other. Tom Remick, he was killed in the Battle of the River Plate, which was one of the first big battles, at naval battle, and he was the chief yeoman of signals on HMS Exeter, and he was probably the first Port Isaac casualty of the Second World War. Like the Otons, the Remicks also lost members in both wars. Tom lost 3 uncles in the First World War, and in the Second World War things didn't get any better, because apart from Tom, his sister Dorothy was also killed in the Plymouth Blitz, and his other sister Kate, she lost her husband William Townsend, and that's Mark Townsend's father. William was the chief steward on the Scottish Minstrel. It was torpedoed by a German U-boat off Ireland in 1940, just a couple of months after Tom was killed, so the family must have been devastated at that time. By a very strange quirk of fate, the U-boat captain, Jürgen Östen, he was the same captain who torpedoed the Berwickshire off Africa 4 years later, killing another one of our casualties, that was Trevor Atkinson. Now, several casualties were in the Royal Navy Patrol Service, and that job of the Royal Navy Patrol Service was carrying out mine-sweeping and anti-submarine duties, mostly in open-decked Old-Grimsby trawlers. So that wasn't a particularly pleasant job to do. We had George Thomas, Leonard Brown, Jack Williams, they were in the patrol service. George Brewer Thomas, he was a gunnery instructor, and he was accidentally killed when a Lewis gun he was demonstrating went off during his lecture. Samuel Phillips Keat, he was killed on the yacht Wilna in August 1940. He's the father of Gordon Keat. We had 5 Air Force casualties. Hedley Brown, he was in 9 Squadron, and he was normally the rear gunner in a Wellington bomber, like the tail end Charlie. And for some reason, nobody knows why, he swapped with the middle gunner on that fateful night. And the plane was attacked over the North Sea and had to ditch. And only the rear gunner who swapped with Hedley survived. We had John Carter. He was also in 9 Squadron, and he was shot down in a raid over Germany. Marshal Collins, he was in a night fighter squadron. That was the squadrons that were protecting our coasts from German bombers and German fighters. Douglas Glynn, Douglas Genders, he was the son of Captain Genders, who lived at the top of the village and very active in village life around about the wartime. Gwendolyn Peach, a very sad story. She got married in 1943 and she died of TB only a couple of months later. So very little married life. We had 11 army casualties. Robert Chadband, he was in the Devonshire Regiment. Henry Genders in the Essex Regiment, that was the brother of Douglas Genders. And he was killed in the Italian invasion of British Somaliland. I'm amazed at how far around the world our casualties are. They just seem to get, almost every battle they seem to be there. We have Ronald Gifford. He was in the Coldstream Guards and he's Terry's older brother. He was killed in the Italian campaign in the battle for Monte Cammino, not Monte Cassino, which is the much more famous place, and that's about 4 miles further north. Stanley Honey, he was a sapper in the Royal Engineers and he was killed just after Dunkirk. John Hoskin, he was in the West Yorkshire Regiment and he actually joined the Chindits, and that was one of our special forces that took the battle to the Japanese in the jungles of Burma, and he died on the return journey to the UK. Richard Kent, he was in the Royal Army Medical Corps. Jim Lobb, he was in our own county battalion, that's the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry. And sadly, he was killed by a sniper on the very day that Tunis fell to end the North African campaign. Arthur Nichols, that's Brian Nichols' dad. Oh, there he is at the back there, Brian Nichols' dad. He was in the Dorsetshire Regiment, and he survived the most terrible battle of Normandy, which was known as Hill 112. The Dorsetshire Regiment were given the task of trying to take Hill 112, which was only about 500 foot high. It wasn't that high, but commanding views over the whole of the area around. And on the top of that was the SS Panzer Division, the most feared of the German troops. On the first day of that battle, there were 107 Dorsetshire men killed on the one day. And on the next 11 days, there were 75 more Dorsetshire men. Now, there were other regiments that were also suffering the same, but that was absolutely incredible. And after those 11 days, Ryan's father's regiment was stood down for some rest. And I'm very pleased that Ryan had one of his father's letters that was actually written at that time. And when you read it at the back there, just remember that only a few days earlier, he had been through hell on earth. And if you read it, you realise that he had no intention of telling any of his relatives back here what he had been through. He plays it fairly light. He even mentions what the weather was, you know, typical Brit abroad, mentioning what the weather was like. But have a look at that letter, and you might also notice that there are 1 or 2 doodles from a very young Brian Nichols there, who I'm sure would make your dad smile if he saw those little doodles as well. But unfortunately, Arthur Nichols was killed just a week later in Operation Bluecoat, and he was one of 33 Dorsetshire men that died that day. A few others we have left is Thomas Richards. He was in the Reconnaissance Corps, and he became a prisoner of war at the fall of Singapore. And like thousands of POWs, he was used by the Japanese as forced labour to build the infamous death railway in Burma, and he died building that, like so many did. Francis Shrimpton, he was in a force I had never even heard of. It was called the Federated Malay States Volunteer Force, and he was killed in the Battle for Singapore. And finally, one who isn't on our memorial, but I found his grave up at Tyndallion Church, and that's Jack Thomas. And he was a trooper in the Royal Tank Regiment, and he was killed at El Alamein in 1942. Now, I think we should all be very proud of our heroes. They gave up their today for our tomorrows. Thank you very much.